This should be the lecture on international human rights and those vulnerable groups falling under international human rights. So, we would like to discuss the very introduction and background of international human rights relating to vulnerable groups, the problems of war, civil war, armed rebellion, and revolutions in parts of Europe, in the American continent, and in parts of Africa. Worried the world community in the last 2 decades of 19th century and the first 2 decades of 20th century. There was complete violation of human rights. No doubt the United Nations High Commissioners for Refugees, the Red Cross, and the Amnesty International made strong efforts to protection of human rights of those victims, but all such attempts became unsuccessful. So the League of Nations, after the end of the First World War, made a fresh attempt on promotion and protection of human rights through establishment of International Court of Arbitration and the Permanent Court of International Justice. All violations of international human rights could not be addressed rightfully by these agencies. So the world community again witnessed the same problem in the form of genocide, apartheid, and racism as the controlling and implementing mechanisms of the League of Nations became failure and some new grave threats came in front of preservation and protection of international human rights. So the world community realized to invent some new concrete and effective measures and to establish bodies and institutions for the promotion and protection of international human rights and to prevent their violation. So, human rights violation is having long-standing history. It resulted out of some inherent social evils like the discriminatory and derogative practices due to religious, racial, sex, nationality, caste, linguistic, regional, etc. since ancient times. So, you are discussing now about the ancient period in Eastern societies. So, during the ancient period, it was religion which caused social disparities, mostly in the Eastern societies like India, China, Middle East, etc. Hindu and some other religions divided the society in the form of social stratification. This led to the growth of casteism, division of society into various groups. Inequality and exploitation became the common trend in society. The upper strata of the society which was in minority became the custodian of all resources and wealth. The majority became the most vulnerable section. The minority becomes the most vulnerable section in the society. The medieval period, which was based on the agrarian and feudal system, divided the society into landlords, feudal lords, the clergy in one hand, and the serf slaves and others as the most vulnerable sections of the society. So now you are discussing about the medieval period Eastern and even in Western societies. So the most vulnerable sections of the society under industrialization, commercialization of the means of production, distribution, and exchange created a new social system which world had never witnessed. The class division of the society raised new social issues which further fed the growth of some new vulnerable social groups. Liberalism or liberalization of policies instead of achieving social cohesion, it sowed the seeds of social conflict. Also, modernization and westernization. Now, I would like to discuss about the modern period and its impact over the modern world. So, modernization and westernization alienated individuals not only from society to also from its social group. So, individual even alienated from himself. Even the trend of globalization could not find any fruitful and everlasting solution to create an egalitarian society. Philosophers, spiritualists, thinkers, reformists, revolutionaries, activities and their efforts could not make possible to eradicate the social problems. In the current scenario, the world is witnessing the issues like casteism, religious discrimination, racial exploitation, and exploitation of weaker sections like children, women, minorities, ethnic tribes, etc. Even the present modern day society witnessing ill treatment and neglect of the disabled and the age-old senior citizens. These current social evils raise the eyebrows of many activities on the open violation of their human rights. At universal level, the international conferences and conventions contributed for development of new modalities or to minimize such violations and to safeguard the life, liberty, and dignity of all individuals. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenants on Civil, Political, Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights elaborately designed and formulated many measures to preserve and protect those basic rights and to secure the dignity of the common mass. Separate specific conferences held to frame new rules and guidelines to secure the rights and dignity of those vulnerable groups. These rules and guidelines adopted into the domestic constitutions and statutes of several countries. The International Human Rights Commission inspired for the establishment of national human rights commissions. Even the judicial organs of several countries made their commitment for the realization of these aspirations. At the present scenario, the most vulnerable groups are the disabled sections, the senior citizens, the minorities, the children, women, etc. Among the above vulnerable groups at present are added the groups of ethnic people. These new exploitative sections are due to rapid industrialization, modernization, and globalization. They are identified as indigenous people. So also another major vulnerable groups is the internally displaced persons beside the international national authorities and their mechanism. Major thrust is on the role and functioning of non-governmental organizations. These non-state entities work and contribute a lot to minimize the tragedies suffering by these vulnerable sections of the society. So, this is all about the introduction and historical background relating to international human rights and those who are falling under the vulnerable groups. And now we would like to discuss some important vulnerable groups. And the first one is falling about the vulnerable groups is the disabled persons. So, disability mainly of two types, the mentally disabled and physically disabled persons. It is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948 that there is an indirect and implied reference found regarding protection of their basic rights, but in subsequent years, the General Assembly adopted some other instruments to further safeguard their basic human rights. So, in 1971, the very Declaration of Mentally Retarded Persons by the General Assembly, which adopted a declaration on the mentally retarded persons, the declaration affirmed their rights as of other human beings and guaranteed their rights as to live with their own family members. The declaration insisted on the facilities such as right to proper medical care and physical therapy, education, training, rehabilitation, right to economic security and decent standard of living, right to protection from exploitation, abuse, and degrading treatments in cases of prosecution for any kind of offences. Their mental condition is fully recognized under due process of law for their trial. And the second important development is relating to in the year 1975, the General Assembly made another declaration. That declaration is on the rights of disabled persons. It defined the very condition of the disabled persons in the following words, that such persons who are unable to ensure their basic necessities to live a normal individual and social life, it recognizes their right as fundamental rights as enjoyed by other individuals and to enable them to be self-reliant. Then the declaration expressed that they have inherent rights to decent level of living with human dignity and rights to economic social security. They are protected from all types of exploitation, discriminatory, derogating, or degrading treatment and abuse. And further, in 1981, International Year of Disabled Persons was observed by the General Assembly, which declared the very year 1981 as International Year of Disabled Persons. And from 1983 to 1992, the years are declared as Decade of Disabled Persons, and it was under the initiative of the General Assembly of United Nations. This observation encouraged member states to promote and adopt measures for the realization of their rights to full participation in social life and to enjoy living conditions equal to other citizens. Further, the General Assembly initiated a world program of action. So, in that world program of action to implement those objectives, this world program of action urged the states to take effective measures for prevention of disability, rehabilitation, and the full participation of disabled persons in social life and development. For that purpose, the United Nations started consultation with national governments, intergovernmental organizations, and non-governmental organizations for their proper implementation and working. And now we would like to discuss the protection principles for mental illness. So the General Assembly in 1991 let the principles for the protection of persons with mental illness and the improvement of mental health care. These principles shall be applied without any discrimination on the grounds of race, sex, color, language, national, social, or ethnic origin, or of any political, legal, and social status, age, property, or birth. These principles also include certain freedoms, such as such disabled persons shall not be unemployed, and they must not be employed in such hazardous works. Sterilization shall never be a treatment for mental illness. Restricted involuntary psychosurgery of such patients. Also restricted involuntary hospitalization of disabled persons. And now we would like to discuss about senior citizens, which are also falling under vulnerable groups regarding international human rights. So, those number of persons above the age of 60 constitutes as senior citizens, and such groups are in evidence in the underdeveloped and developing nations of Asian, African, and Latin American continents, as to an United Nations estimate at present. There are up to 2,000 millions of people who are identified as aged or old persons there. Conditions mostly depend on the local, regional, and national factors. These factors are due to their respective social, economic, religious, and cultural patterns. The aged and old persons even in the Western developed countries are spending an isolated and alienated life. For the above reasons, concern grew among the world community for their overall betterment and development. Such persons are not only deprived of basic economic needs, also lack of social attention and care. To minimize those, it was Argentina in 1948 which first time raised the issue in United Nations, and subsequently in 1969 Malta raised the issue again in United Nations General Assembly. So in that connection we would like to discuss that in 1971 the General Assembly requested the Secretary General to prepare a comprehensive report on the elderly persons and to suggest guidelines for national and international action. Accordingly, the General Assembly in 1978 organized the World Conference on Aging Persons, and which was held an international plan of action on aging was adopted by the General Assembly. The goal was to effectively deal aging persons, keeping in mind the special concern and needs of the elderly persons. The plan attempted to understand the social, economic, and cultural implications of aging. It made 62 recommendations for action in areas like nutrition, health, housing, environment, family, social welfare, income security, employment, etc. for the elderly persons. Accordingly, the General Assembly observed October 1 as the International Day for Elderly Persons or Older Persons since 1990. So, and it adopted some principles which are that they are opportunity to work and to determine when to leave the workforce. So they remain integrated in society and participate actively in the formulation of policies which affect their well-being. They should have access to health care for their physical, mental, and emotional well-being and full opportunity for development of their potentiality by making access to educational, cultural, and social recreational activities in the society. They are living in dignity and guaranteeing security from exploitation, mental and physical abuse. So the General Assembly in 1992 convened an international special conference to observe the 10th anniversary, and that 10th anniversary of the adoption of the International Plan of Action Aging, which was adopted in 1980 at Vienna. International Plan of Action with 62 recommendations. So, the General Assembly adopted a declaration in 1992 for international cooperation to promote lifelong health and income generation. So, International Facial Conference, which adopted in 1992 for international cooperation to promote lifelong health income generation. It urged the national initiative to view older persons as contributors to their societies and not as burden. And in particularly in 2002, the very important development was relating to Second World Assembly on Aging was held in Madrid. It adopted the International Plan of Action and a political declaration on stressing the crucial importance of interpreting aging issues into all development plans. The declaration focused on 8 important issues, and those 8 important issues concerning the development of older persons such as integration and empowerment of older persons, involvement of older persons in decision making, creating employment opportunities for them, improving living conditions of the older persons, improving rural infrastructure to alleviate them from poverty, interaction of migrant older persons with new communities, improving housing and living environment, enhancing public awareness of the important contributions of elderly persons to society. Finally, the action plan stated national and international measures to adequate implementation for development frameworks such as relating to poverty eradication strategies for elderly persons. So, these are the developments at international level in regarding protection and preservation of human rights of those vulnerable groups that we have discussed in this lecture relating to the very introduction and historical background and the position that it was during ancient period in the Eastern societies and during the medieval period in Eastern and Western societies and the continuing problem of international human rights even in modern period due to industrialization, modernization and globalization. And in particular in this lecture we have completely dealt with those important vulnerable groups such as the disabled persons and the senior citizens or the older persons or aged persons and the international initiative took by the United Nations General Assembly by observing certain important years and dates in relating to disability and in relation to old aged persons or senior citizens and the concrete measures taken by the international human rights agencies and organizations with due effort by the United Nations organization.